They believed her body was the law. That was their mistake. I arrived at the inland plantation where the owner's daughter ruled through size and fear. She was large, intimidating, impossible to challenge. People stepped aside before she spoke. Workers flinched when she approached. Her presence alone made grown men shrink. But I watched her patterns for 3 weeks. I noticed how she avoided prolonged work, how her breathing became labored in the heat, how her strength had limits she tried to hide. Then one morning on uneven ground, I stepped aside at exactly the right moment. She stumbled, not fell, but stumbled, and everyone saw what they thought was impossible. They saw her off balance. They saw her strength fail. That single moment of visible weakness broke something permanent. Her authority leaked away quietly after that. Supervisors began limiting her involvement. Workers stopped flinching automatically. Fear stopped being absolute. I did not defeat her. I simply waited until terrain and exhaustion revealed what size tried to conceal. So I ask you now, what happens when the body they feared as law stumbles in front of witnesses who can never unsee it? I arrive at the inland plantation where silence moves faster than orders. The journey here took 3 days in a wagon that smelled like fear and unwashed bodies. Now I stand in morning heat that presses down like a hand on my shoulders. The air is thick, wet, hard to breathe. I observe how people step aside when the owner's daughter approaches, as if space itself belongs to her. She is large, not tall, but wide. Her body fills doorways. Her shadow covers ground. She walks through the yard between the main house and the walk sheds, and people move before she speaks. They do not wait for orders. They simply disappear from her path. There is no memory yet. Lead the understanding that fear organizes this place. The plantation is not like the coastal properties I have seen. No rice fields stretch into marshland. No tidal systems requiring knowledge of water and season. This is cotton and corn, tobacco in smaller plots, work that breaks backs through repetition rather than complexity. I take my assigned position near the supply sheds, where tools are distributed each morning. The overseer who brought me here says nothing about her. He does not need to. I can see what she is in the way others arrange themselves around her absence. Fear is visible. It leaves marks in posture and silence. My hand finds the bronze weight in my pocket. It is still there. Constant since Elmina, since my uncle's counting house, since the day I understood that some measures survive any distance. I watch and wait. I do not know yet what I am watching for. She oversees work by standing close, letting her size speak before words do. Her name is Margaret. I learned this from whispers, never from direct address. No one speaks to her unless she speaks first. No one approaches unless summoned. I observe how even overseers defer to her gestures. She points, and men move. She shakes her head, and tasks are abandoned. Her father owns this land, but she commands its daily operations through presence alone. The sight triggers a faint memory of large animals scattering a herd by presence alone. I remember Cape Coast. I remember watching cattle driven to market through narrow streets. One bull, massive and scarred, walked through the herd, and smaller animals moved without being pushed. They felt the displacement of air, heard the heavy footfall, understood that proximity meant danger. Margaret moves like that bull. Heavy steps, deliberate placement. An understanding that her body is a tool of control. I begin watching her patterns instead of her strength. When does she arrive? Where does she stand? How long does she stay before retreating to shade or house? The white man thinks size is permanent power. He believes the body's threat never diminishes. I know better. I have seen large animals fall. I have seen strength fail when breath becomes labor instead of reflex. During hauling, she singles me out for moving too slowly. I am carrying lumber from the storage shed to the construction site where a new tobacco barn is being raised. The wood is green, heavy, awkward in length. I adjust my grip twice before finding balance. Your voice cuts across the yard. Move faster or move elsewhere. I observe how intimidation replaces instruction. She does not tell me how to carry the load more efficiently. She does not demonstrate technique. She simply threatens displacement, expects fear to create speed. I stop walking. I do not set down the lumber. I do not speak. I simply stop and look at her directly. Her posture triggers my memory of hunters who charge first to test resolve. In my land, this meant the first approach reveals intention. A hunter who charges without studying the target is either supremely confident or testing whether prey will run. If prey runs, the hunt simplifies. If prey holds position, the hunter must I remain still and learn how she reacts to resistance. She takes 2 steps toward me. Her breathing is audible now, slightly labored. The morning is already hot. She has been standing in sun for over an hour. Did you hear me? Her voice is louder, but not faster. Yes, I speak quietly, clearly. I do not apologize. I do not explain. I simply confirm that I heard. She stares. I wait. The lumber is heavy in my hands, but I do not shift or show strain. Finally, she turns away. Get it done, she says to the air. To everyone, to no one specifically. I resume walking, but something has been established. I did not run. I notice she avoids prolonged tasks and hands off work once it strains her breath. 3 days pass. I watch her move through the plantation's daily rhythms. She appears mid-morning after breakfast. She circulates through work sites for 2 hours. Then she retreats to the house, to shade, to supervision that requires standing still rather than moving constantly. I observe this without comment. I file each pattern carefully. The detail triggers a clearer memory of animals, driven to exhaustion rather than trapped. I remember hunters in the forest near Eldon. Some preys too fast to catch directly, too strong to overpower in brief struggle. For those animals, the hunt becomes endurance. Chase them until their lungs burn. Push them until their legs weaken. Wait until their strength becomes their burden. Size requires fuel. Power requires breath. Intimidation requires the energy to maintain presence. Margaret's strength is real, but it is not infinite. It has limits she tries to hide by withdrawing before those limits become visible. I file the knowledge away. I do not know yet how it will matter, but all knowledge matters eventually. My uncle taught me that. Every detail, every pattern, every small truth accumulates until understanding becomes complete. An older handler works animals nearby and keeps his distance from her. His name is Samuel, different from the Samuel at the Charleston docks, but the name carries similar weight. Steady, reliable, careful. This Samuel works with mules and oxen, maintaining harnesses, treating injuries, managing the animals that move heavy loads. I observe how he times his movements when she is absent. He begins tasks when she retreats to the house. He completes work during her longest absences. He becomes invisible through scheduling rather than hiding. His caution triggers my memory of elders reading danger by sound and shadow. In my village, the oldest hunters did not rely on sight alone. They listened for patterns in bird calls that indicated predators. They watched shadows move across clearings to judge what cast them. They survived by reading environments completely, by understanding that danger announces itself in subtle ways before becoming obvious. Samuel reads Margaret the same way. He knows her schedule better than she does. He understands her patterns of movement and attention. He survives by staying outside her focus while remaining productive enough to avoid punishment. I begin aligning my work with his rhythms. When he moves to the far fields, I request assignments near the storage areas. When he works in the barn, I position myself at the tool sheds. We create a pattern of mutual absence from Margaret's immediate attention. We do not speak of this. We do not coordinate explicitly. But Samuel nods once when our paths cross, and I understand we are reading the same signs. She confronts another worker publicly, forcing compliance through proximity. A young man 16, perhaps 17, is accused of taking extra rations. The charge comes from another enslaved person, one who curries favor through reporting infractions, real or imagined. Margaret summons the accused to the center of the yard where everyone can see. This is deliberate theater. She does not handle this privately. She requires Witnesses. I observe the crowd's fear, not her technique. People stop working to watch. They do not gather close, but they watch because not watching might be noticed. Attention is mandatory, even when participation is forbidden. She stands close to the accused, using her size to compress space around him. She does not touch him. She does not need to. Her body is the threat. Her proximity is the punishment. You take what you're given, she says. Her voice is not loud, but it carries. Nothing more. Understand? The young man nods. His eyes are down. His shoulders curve inward, making himself smaller in response to her mass. New memory, now only confirmation that authority here depends on witnesses. Private power is limited power. Public demonstrations reinforce the structure through collective fear. I stay where eyes can see. I do not react. I do not show support or condemnation. I am present, but neutral, visible, but unremarkable. But I note how she breathes harder after the confrontation, how she returns to the house sooner than usual. Intimidation costs her something. Each performance extracts a price. I hear whispers of injuries, blamed on accidents. The stories circulate carefully, never directly, never where overseers or family might hear. A broken arm during loading, a crushed foot under a wagon wheel, a shoulder separated during what was reported as a fall. Each injury has Margaret nearby when it happened. Each victim was someone who had recently challenged her authority or questioned her judgment. Each incident is recorded as accidental. I observe how no one challenges her version of events. No one investigates. No one asks witnesses to testify. Her word is accepted because questioning it would require authority. No enslaved person possesses, and no white overseer wants to exercise against the owner's daughter. That talk triggers my memory of villages protecting powerful figures until proof became unavoidable. I remember a trader in Elmina who cheated weights for 3 years. Everyone knew. Everyone suffered small losses. But no one challenged him because he had connections to the governor's office. Because accusation without absolute proof meant retaliation. Because collective silence felt safer than individual risk. Until a Portuguese merchant brought his own scales and demanded public verification. Until the discrepancy became too obvious to ignore. Until the community's tolerance for small theft ended when larger theft was proven. I recognize her flaw forming. Faith that fear will always be enough. Margaret believes her size and her family position make her untouchable. She believes intimidation is permanent, that physical presence creates permanent authority, that fear once established never needs maintenance or confirmation. She is wrong. Fear is not permanent. Fear requires feeding. Fear fades when the cost of maintaining it becomes visible, when the threat loses credibility, when people see the limits of what they feared. That night, I pause before continuing this memory. I am alone in the quarters, sitting on the edge of my sleeping platform. The room is dark except for moonlight through gaps in the wallboards. Others sleep around me, their breathing filling the space with sound and warmth. I acknowledge the danger of studying someone who expects obedience. Margaret is not a merchant whose fraud can be exposed through ledgers. She is not a system that collapses when one number is corrected. She is a person with direct power over bodies, meaning included. Still, observation must become analysis. Patterns must become understanding. Understanding must become preparation. My uncle taught me that knowledge itself is protection. They can take your freedom, he said. The day they took me from his house, they can take your labor. They can take your name and your language and your home, but they cannot take what you know unless you forget it. Memory is the only property that survives every theft. I do not forget. I never forget. I know Margaret appears I know she avoids prolonged exertion. I know her authority depends on witnesses and proximity. I know injuries follow those who resist her. I know she believes fear is permanent. Dawn becomes the transition. Tomorrow, I will watch more carefully. I will note not just her patterns, but her limits. I will observe not just her strength, but what that strength costs her. She assigns me to assist with heavy lifting under her watch. The task is moving barrels from the loading dock to the storage cellar. The barrels are full salted pork, dried beans, flour. Each one weighs more than a man can carry comfortably. The work requires 2 people per barrel. Careful coordination. Steady movement down wooden stairs, slick with spilled grain and humidity. Margaret positions herself at the top of the stairs, watching each descent. I observe how she escalates pressure when challenged. When movement's too slow, she steps closer. When coordination falters, her voice sharpens. When someone pauses to adjust grip, she questions their competence loudly enough for others to hear. The tension triggers a clear memory of hunters using terrain to outlast prey. I remember watching men track antelope in dry season. The animals were faster than humans, stronger in short bursts. Direct pursuit was impossible, but the hunters knew the landscape where water was scarce, where shade was absent, where the ground became too hard to run without exhaustion. They did not chase the antelope. They pressured it toward terrain, where speed became liability, where strength burned faster than it could be I began choosing my footing carefully on the stairs. I notice which boards are solid, which are weakened by rot or water damage. I observe where Margaret stands always at the top, never descending, never following the work into the confined space of the cellar. She commands from positions that favor her. She avoids situations where her size becomes disadvantage rather than threat. The older handler speaks to me briefly about balance and breath. Samuel approaches while I am adjusting harness on a mule. His timing is careful. Margaret has just returned to the house. The overseer is occupied elsewhere. We have perhaps 5 minutes without direct supervision. Balance matters more than strength, he says quietly, his hands working leather straps as he speaks, especially on uneven ground. I observe his eyes never meet hers when she is present. Even now, speaking to me, he watches the path to the house, the angle of shadows, the position of others. His words trigger my memory of leverage, taught with stones and rope. My uncle showed me once how to move a boulder using a wooden pole and a smaller stone as fulcrum. Strength is simple, he said. Leverage is complex. Simple fails when the task exceeds the man. Complex succeeds by multiplying what the man already has. Samuel is teaching me leverage, not the physics of poles and stones, but the leverage of position, timing, terrain, how to use environment to multiply modest strength against overwhelming size. An alliance forms without promises. We do not discuss Margaret explicitly. We do not plan or coordinate verbally, but we have become collaborators in survival, readers of the same danger, students of the same threatening presence. Breath tells you when strength is ending, Samuel adds, his voice barely audible. Listen for it. Then he walks away, his work apparently complete, our conversation apparently coincidental. But I understand. Watch her breathing. Note when it becomes labored. That is when size becomes burdened instead of weapon. I watch her routine across several days. Morning. She appears around 8 o'clock, already flushed from heat, even though the sun is not yet high. She circulates through work sites, stopping to observe, occasionally to instruct or intimidate. Her movements are deliberate, but not fast. Midday. By 11 o'clock, her breathing is noticeably heavier. She seeks shade. She drinks water frequently. She delegates tasks rather than supervising them directly. Her presence becomes more stationary. Afternoon. After the noon meal, she often disappears entirely. Sometimes she returns late afternoon when heat begins to fade. Sometimes she does not return until the following morning. I observe when her strength peaks and when it fades. Morning is her time of greatest power. Afternoon is vulnerability, disguised as withdrawal. The repetition triggers my memory of tracking fatigue by subtle signs. Hunters tracking wounded prey watch for changes in gait, in speed, in the animal's willingness to confront rather than flee. These changes tell you when the wound is affecting performance, when strength is being overwhelmed by damage or exhaustion. Margaret is not wounded, but she is not inexhaustible either. Her strength is real in moments, but finite across hours. Her authority depends on brief demonstrations of power, not sustained effort. A plan begins shaping around time, not force. I cannot overpower her. No one here can. Her size and her family position make direct confrontation suicidal. But I can wait. I can position myself where timing matters more than strength. where her fatigue becomes more significant than my lack of size, where terrain favors balance over mass. I hesitate, knowing miscalculation could cost everything. The plan forming in my mind is not revenge. It is not justice. It is survival wearing the mask of compliance, while preparing for a moment when her authority might be questioned without obvious challenge. I acknowledge the hesitation aloud to myself, whispering in the darkness of the quarters. This could end me. This could end worse than anything I have survived. I remember my capture beginning with underestimating another's reach. I was 17. I thought speed and agility were enough. I thought youth made me invulnerable. I ran when I should have hidden. I fought when I should have negotiated. I underestimated how far power could reach, how quickly force could be mobilized, how completely my assumptions about my own capabilities were wrong. I survived that mistake by luck, not wisdom. I cannot afford another mistake of similar magnitude. I decide patience will be my protection. I will not create the moment. I will recognize it when it arrives. I will position myself to benefit from it, if benefit is possible, to survive it, if survival is all that remains available. My hand finds the bronze weight in my pocket. It is still there, smooth from years of handling, warm from my body. In my land, this meant preparation without guarantee. Hunters prepared for days before the hunt, knowing that preparation did not ensure success, only increased its possibility. They sharpened spears, knowing the spear might never be thrown. They studied terrain, knowing the prey might never appear. But when the moment came, preparation meant the difference between eating and starving, between returning home and dying in the forest. I am preparing now. I am watching. I am waiting. The moment will come, or it will not, but I will be ready either way. I know her patterns now. I know when her breath becomes labored, when her strength costs more than it demonstrates. I know Samuel watches the same signs I watch, that alliance exists without words or promises. I know terrain matters more than size when balance determines outcome. But knowledge is not action. Watching is not intervention, and the distance between preparation and execution is where men die or survive. I stand at that distance now, and I am afraid, not of her size or her violence or her family's power, but of the moment when I must choose between remaining invisible and allowing truth to become visible. That moment approaches. I feel it like weather changing, and I do not know yet whether I am ready. During a task near uneven ground, I position myself where balance matters. The opportunity arrives on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after I began watching Margaret's patterns. The work is moving cut timber from the forest edge to the construction site. The ground between is uneven rutted from wagon wheels, sloped toward drainage, scattered with stones and roots. I observe her rush to assert control when she arrives at the work site. She is later than usual, her breathing already elevated before exertion begins. The morning is humid, oppressive. Sweat darkens her dress at the back and underarms. She singles out 2 workers, moving too slowly by her assessment. Her voice is sharp, her gestures aggressive. She moves toward them across the uneven ground with her characteristic confidence-heavy steps. Direct path, size clearing space. The setting triggers my memory of animals losing footing before strength. I remember watching buffalo ford a river in the dry season. The water was low, but the riverbed was slick with algae. Large animals confident in their power moved too quickly, trusted weight to keep them grounded. But weight worked against them on unstable surface. Some fell, some recovered, some drowned because they could not regain footing before current overwhelmed them. I do not provoke any weight. I am positioned near the path she is taking, close enough that she will pass near me, far enough that I appear coincidental rather than confrontational. I adjust the lumber I am carrying, shifting it slightly so that when I move aside as I must when she passes, the movement will be natural. Expected, appropriate deference. She advances too quickly, breathing hard. Her approach is aggressive, purposeful. She is focused on the workers ahead of her, not on the ground beneath her feet. Her breathing is audible, now not gasping, not desperate, but labored enough that I know her morning exertion has already depleted her. I observe witnesses gathering. Other workers have stopped to watch, drawn by the sound of her voice, by the familiar pattern of public intimidation. They do not gather close, but they watch. Attention is mandatory, even when participation is forbidden. No memory, not only timing, every detail of the last 3 weeks. Her breathing, her reliance on terrain that favors her converges into this single moment. She is 5 steps away. 4, 3. I step aside at the last moment. Not slowly, not hesitantly, but smoothly, naturally. The movement of someone making space for authority to pass. The lumber in my hands shifts as I move, requiring me to take 2 steps to the side to maintain balance. My second step places me exactly where I need to be out of her path, on solid ground, balanced and still. Her path takes her across a section of ground where wagon wheels have created ruts, where recent rain has left the surface unstable beneath a thin crust of dried mud. She stumbles, not harmed, but exposed. Her left foot comes down in a rut hidden beneath surface crust. The ground gives way. Her weight, her momentum, her confidence in her own muscle of it works against her. She does not fall completely. She catches herself with her right leg, her arms windmilling briefly for balance. But the stumble is visible, obvious, undeniable. I observe shock ripple through the onlookers. The workers who moments ago were paralyzed by her approach now see something impossible made real Margaret off balance. Margaret's uncertain, Margaret's body working against her instead of for her. The moment triggers my memory of a hunt ending without a strike. I remember my uncle telling me about leopards that hunt by intimidation rather than speed. They stalk, they position, they make prey, run in panic. But sometimes the prey stops running. Sometimes the prey turns to face the leopard. And the leopard, finding confrontation instead of fear, often withdraws without attacking. The threat, my uncle said, is more powerful than its execution. Once executed and survived, the threat loses permanence. Strength reveals its limit. Margaret's strength is real, but it is not infinite. It is not perfect. It can be compromised by terrain, by timing, by her own exhaustion. And everyone watching just saw that truth demonstrated. She recovers quickly. She straightens. She brushes mud from her dress. Her face is flushed heat, embarrassment, anger, all visible in the redness of her skin. But the damage is done. The moment cannot be unseen. She withdraws in anger, issuing orders instead of threats. "Get back to work," she says to everyone and no one. Her voice is sharp but not loud. She does not approach the workers she was targeting. She does not resume her path across uneven ground. I observe her authority wobble. Not collapse, not disappear, but shift, adjust, become less absolute than it was 5 minutes ago. She walks back toward the house, choosing the wagon road where the ground is packed and level, where her size is advantage rather than liability. The plan has moved beyond secrecy. Witnesses have seen enough. I did not push her. I did not create the uneven ground. I did not cause her exhaustion. I simply positioned myself where those factors converged, where her own momentum and mass became liabilities instead of weapons. The white man thinks I attacked her, but I did nothing except move aside at the right moment, in the right place, on ground that told truth about what strength cannot overcome. Samuel catches my eye from across the worksite. He nods once. So briefly it could be imagination, but I know it is real. He saw, he understands, he recognizes what just happened. Other workers return to their tasks without comment, but the quality of their silence has changed. Before, silence was fear. Now, silence is consideration. They are thinking, they are reconsidering. They are wondering what they just witnessed and what it means. Work resumes under strained quiet. The afternoon proceeds without incident. Margaret does not return to the worksite. The overseer circulates, but seems distracted, less attentive than usual. Perhaps he heard what happened. Perhaps he is uncertain how to respond to something that was not technically insubordination, but felt like challenge anyway. I observe how people no longer flinch as before, When movement suggests or approach, the automatic deference is slightly delayed, slightly less complete. The space people clear when authority approaches has diminished by inches small, barely noticeable, but real. The shift triggers my memory of leaders losing hold once fear breaks. In my village, a chief maintained authority through a combination of wisdom and intimidation. He was not cruel, but he was absolute. His word was final. His presence commanded silence. Then he made a decision that cost lives, unnecessarily sent hunters into territory he knew was dangerous, because he needed meat for a festival. 3 men died. The decision could not be hidden or justified. And after that, his authority was never the same. People still obeyed, but the obedience was slower, more grudging, less automatic. Once people see that authority can err, that power can stumble, that strength has limits, they cannot unsee it. The knowledge changes everything, even when nothing explicit changes. Power leaks away quietly, not through revolution or rebellion, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the accumulation of small moments, when compliance becomes slightly less automatic, when fear becomes slightly less. She avoids direct confrontation with me afterward. 3 days pass. Margaret returns to her routine appearing, circulating through work sites, withdrawing when heat and exertion make her breathing labored. But she does not approach me directly. She does not assign me tasks under her immediate supervision. She does not speak to me. I observe distance replace dominance. She has recalculated, consciously or not. She recognizes that direct confrontation with me might produce another moment of visible limitation. So, she avoids creating that possibility. New memory, now only consequence. Her presence no longer clears space the way it did. People still move aside, still show deference, but the movement is slower, the deference more measured. She has not lost her position. Her father still owns this plantation. She is still the owner's daughter. She still has authority that no enslaved person can officially challenge. But something has shifted. The absolute quality of her power, the sense that her will was irresistible, that her presence was overwhelming, that her judgment was final, has been compromised. I do not celebrate this. I do not feel triumph. I feel relief at having survived the moment, and caution about what comes next. In my land, this meant the most dangerous time comes after power is challenged. Wounded authority seeks to reassert itself, often with violence, often with examples made of those who created the wound. I remain careful. I remain visible, but unremarkable. I do not push further. I do not test boundaries or seek additional confrontation. I survive by letting the moment speak for itself, by allowing witnesses to draw their own conclusions without my commentary or encouragement. Supervisors begin limiting her involvement in labor disputes. The change is subtle, implemented without announcement or explanation. When conflicts arise, workers accused of laziness or theft, tasks not completed to standard, the overseer handles them directly rather than summoning Margaret or allowing her to intervene. I observe excuses made on her behalf. Miss Margaret is occupied with household matters. Miss Margaret is asked not to be disturbed. The master prefers we handle this directly. The change triggers my memory of elders sidelined without ceremony. In my uncle's trading house, there was a senior accountant who had worked there for 20 years. He was knowledgeable, experienced, trusted, but he began making errors small at first, then larger. Not fraud, not intentional deception, just the natural decline of a mind-losing precision. My uncle did not fire him or publicly demote him. He simply stopped asking his opinion on major decisions. He assigned him simpler tasks. He gradually reduced his responsibilities while maintaining his title and position. The accountant understood what was happening. Everyone understood, but the transition was smooth, dignified, accomplished, without confrontation or formal acknowledgement. Authority is reallocated without announcement. Margaret's role is being diminished in the same way, gradually, quietly, without official declaration that would require her to respond or resist. She still appears at work sites. She still issues occasional orders, but her involvement is monitored, limited, managed by others who have decided that her authority creates more problems than it solves. The older handler nods once as we pass. Samuel and I cross paths near the barn on a Thursday morning. The sun is high, the air thick with humidity. He is leading a mule toward the fields. I am carrying tools back to storage. Our eyes meet briefly. He nods one slow, deliberate, weighted with meaning. I observe acknowledgement without celebration. We do not speak. We do not stop walking. We do not draw attention to the moment. The gesture triggers my memory of survival, marked by silence. My uncle taught me that victory celebrated too loudly becomes target for resentment and retribution. When you win, he said, act as if nothing happened. Let others notice, let others speak. But you remained as you were, changed only in private knowledge. Nothing more is needed between Samuel and me. We both know what happened. We both understand its significance. We both recognize that Margaret's authority has been compromised, that fear has been questioned, that the structure of power on this plantation has shifted slightly. But to speak of it would be to make it explicit. To celebrate would be to make it target. To acknowledge would be to claim responsibility. So we pass in silence to men who read the same signs, who collaborated without words, who achieved something significant by doing very little except watching and waiting. My hand finds the bronze weights in my pocket. It is still there, constant since Elmina, since my uncle's counting house, since the day I learned that some measures survive every distance and every theft. She retreats into isolation, still feared, but no longer obeyed. Margaret's appearances become less frequent over the following weeks. Days pass without her leaving the main house. When she does appear, her circulation through work sites is brief, perfunctory, without the aggressive supervision that previously defined her presence. I observe how strength without audience fades. Power requires witnesses to reinforce it, requires regular demonstration to maintain credibility. When demonstrations stop, when presence becomes occasional rather than constant, authority becomes memory rather than current reality. The plantation adjusts its balance. Work continues with different supervision. The overseer takes more direct control. Other members of the owner's family are brother and uncle involve themselves in daily operations they previously delegated to Margaret. Order reforms without her at the center. The system does not collapse. Authority does not disappear. But it redistributes, finding new channels, new enforcers, new patterns. The white man thinks one person's authority cannot be replaced. He believes individual power is essential, irreplaceable, that without specific enforcers, the system fails. But I have seen power transfer many times. In Elmina, in Charleston, Elmina, systems survive individuals. Authority finds new hosts. Control adapts to new circumstances. What does not survive is the specific fear Margaret cultivated for her body, her size, her willingness to use proximity as weapon. That fear diminishes when she withdraws. That fear fades when witnesses remember her stumbling rather than her threatening. I am reassigned away from heavy labor. The change comes without explanation. One morning the overseer assigns me to work in the plantation's small vegetable garden that supplies the main house. The work is lighter, less supervised, marginally less brutal than hauling timber or moving barrels. I observe the cost fall elsewhere, uneven as always. My reduction in hardship does not reduce anyone else's hardship. My slight improvement does not improve the system. It simply redistributes burden. I do not soften it. I cannot. Individual survival sometimes means accepting benefit that others do not receive, accepting small advantages within a system that remains fundamentally unchanged. In my land, this meant the complexity of survival under oppression. My uncle taught me that resistance takes many forms, that survival itself is resistance, that living to remember and testify is victory, even when it looks like compliance. "Judge me later," he said once, when I questioned why he paid bribes to colonial officials. "Judge me when you know all my choices. But understand that staying in business kept 20 families fed, kept apprentices learning, kept knowledge alive that would have been lost if I chose martyrdom over compromise. I am not claiming virtue. I am claiming survival. I am acknowledging that I accepted lighter work while others continued to break under heavy loads, that I benefited from a small redistribution of authority that did not change the fundamental system. Survival rarely distributes fairness. It distributes luck, timing, small advantages that compound or disappear based on factors beyond individual control. From a distance, I watch her move alone. Margaret walks the perimeter of the plantation on a Sunday afternoon. No one accompanies her. No one works nearby. She is simply walking exercise, perhaps, or escape from the house, or restlessness that has no other outlet. I observe how size means less without submission around it. Her body is the same. Her physical presence is unchanged, but without people to intimidate, without workers to defer and create space. Her size is simply her sizing, neither weapon nor authority, just flesh and bone and mass. The memory of hunters, releasing exhausted prey, returns. Sometimes the hunt ends not with a kill, but with recognition that the prey is no longer worth pursuing. The effort exceeds the value. The risk outweighs the reward. The prey lives not because it escaped, but because it ceased to be target. I do not know if Margaret understands what happened. I do not know if she recognizes that her authority was compromised by a moment of imbalance, by witnesses who saw strength fail, by a system that decided managing her was more costly than sidelining her. I keep walking past the garden fence, carrying water for the vegetables, staying visible but separate, present but not engaged. She does not see me, or if she does not acknowledge it. We exist in the same physical space, but occupy different realities, hers diminishing, mine carefully maintained. I pause before ending this account. It is night again. The quarters are dark and close. Men sleep around me, their breathing filling the space with sound and warmth. I sit on my sleeping platform, the bronze weight in my palm, thinking about what to remember and how to remember it. They believed her body was the law. Her father believed it. The overseers believed it. The workers believed it until belief cracked, until one moment showed that belief was built on assumption rather than unchangeable truth. But strength that cannot last becomes a question, and questions undo fear. Margaret's strength was real. I do not diminish it. Her size, her physical power, her willingness to use her body as weapon, all of it was true. But truth is not the same as permanence. Power that depends on constant demonstration requires constant energy. Authority that depends on intimidation requires witnesses who remain intimidated. I did not defeat her. I waited until fear let go, and then I lived. That is the memory I will carry. Not victory, not justice, not even revenge. Just survival, earned by patience, by observation, by recognizing that all power has limits, even when those limits are hidden. In my land, this meant the wisdom of waiting. My uncle taught me that the hunter who waits outlives the hunter who rushes. The trader who watches survives. The trader who acts on impulse. The accountant who remembers outlasts. The accountant who forgets patterns because the present seems urgent. I do not forget. I never forget. I remember Margaret approaching across uneven ground, breathing hard, confident that her mass made her invulnerable. I remember stepping aside at precisely the right moment. I remember her stumbling, not failing completely, but stumbling enough that witnesses saw what they had not imagined they could see. I remember how power leaked away quietly after that moment, how authority redistributed itself, how her presence became less central to the plantation's daily operations. I remember surviving by doing very little, except watching and waiting and positioning myself where terrain and timing mattered. More than size or strength, my hand finds the bronze weight in my pocket. It is still there. It measures gold. It measures everything. It measures the distance between fear and its breaking, between power and its limits, between strength and the exhaustion that undoes it. I am still here, still alive, still carrying the weight that survived every theft, every distance, every attempt to make me forget what I know. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. 3 months later, Margaret is sent to live with relatives in another county. The official explanation is, vague family obligations, household management, some requirement that conveniently removes her from the plantation. I hear this news third-hand, from a house servant, who heard it from the overseer, who heard it from the owner himself. Margaret is not returning. Her role here has ended. I do not celebrate. I do not feel triumph or satisfaction. I feel only the quiet relief of having survived something that could have destroyed me. Samuel and I continue working. Our alliance remains unspoken, unmarked, unacknowledged, except through occasional glances that confirm we both understand what happened and what it cost and what it means. The plantation continues. The system continues. Authority continues. My enslavement continues. But within that continuation, small spaces exist, where observation creates knowledge, where patience creates opportunity, where timing creates outcomes that direct confrontation never could. I carry the bronze weight. I carry the memory. I carry the understanding that power is not permanent, that fear is not inevitable, that strength has limits even when those limits are carefully hidden. And I wait because waiting is what I do best, because patience is the weapon available to those who have no other weapons, because survival itself is victory when the alternative is erasure. I do not forget. I never forget. And that memory, the memory of watching and waiting and witnessing power stumble, is mine. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be taken. It survives as long as I survive. That is enough.